The Archivum Secretum forbids entry to unrecorded objects, and yet the copper key was already inside when I arrived, resting on the empty logbook like it had signed itself in. I am Paolo Invernizzi, Senior Archivist of the Vatican's Inner Repository. My post begins at 5 each evening and concludes just after lauds, unless the Gregorian Codex is being rotated for conservation, in which case I remain through the dawn hours. My duties are quiet, methodical. I process intake from affiliated diocese-sealed relics, condemned texts, or ecclesiastical artifacts deemed too obscure or unstable for display. These are housed in the fourth sublevel, the vault below the vault, where items are not merely stored, but deliberately forgotten. Entry requires dual approval, mine, and that of Father Corsi, the nocturnist priest assigned to the floor. We share little conversation, but enough ritual. Before we unlock any chamber, we recite the Litany of Presence, a short prayer that ends, "What is hidden remains holy, what is found must kneel." Then we record the artifact in the logbook, in black ink, with initials from both parties. It is this rigor that has preserved the order. Nothing enters without a record. Nothing exits without a reason. On the night it happened, there were no scheduled deliveries, no access requests, no deviations noted by Father Corsi. But when I entered the archive at 1700 hours on a Thursday in early November, there it was. A single copper key. No tag, no seal, no accompanying file. It sat on the leather cover of the unmarked ledger's maul, dull and warm to the touch. I checked the intake chute. Empty. Surveillance reels? No interruption. No one had passed through the outer gates since none, and yet the key was real, heavy, oiled, and old. More troubling was what lay beneath it. The page it rested on bore no writing except for a faint indentation, as though something had been written and erased something in my own hand. I told myself it was a misplaced maintenance key. I told myself I would inventory it and alert the custodial prefect in the morning. But it didn't feel misplaced. It felt placed. I kept the key in a velvet pouch in my desk drawer and tried to proceed with rounds. Section 7 heretical incunabula was calm, the air still, candles burned evenly, no signs of disturbance. But in Section 11, where unstable correspondences are housed, I found the lights had not turned on. Bulbs here are sodium vapor, automated on a sealed switch. Yet now, they sputtered and died as I entered, even though the diagnostics had passed at Vespers. At the center of the room stood one of the prayer lecterns used for recitation during containment reviews. I approached it slowly, noting no footprints, no dust displaced. And then I saw the book left open on the wood. It was the Codex Allegorum, a manuscript I had sealed personally 3 months prior. Its final page had never been translated. Every attempt produced a different meaning, a different syntax, a different hand. The words shifted when read aloud. Tonight, that page displayed a short Latin phrase, repeated 12 times. Clavis inest. Non est tua. The key is within. It is not yours. The key is within. The hair on my arms lifted. I returned to my desk, removed the copper key, and placed it beside the open codex. It did not react, but I did. Because now, resting against the velvet pouch where the key had been, was a folded piece of paper. Cream-colored, torn neatly, inked in my own handwriting, though I had never written it. Try the door past the red fire hose, the one that isn't there in daylight. There is a narrow corridor behind the emergency stairwell, mostly used by janitorial staff. I had never paid it any mind. The red fire hose box had faded with time, and the wall beside it had always been blank plaster until that night. At precisely 3:17 in the morning, I returned with the key and found a door. It should not have been there. The wall had no seams, no masonry lines, no records, not even in the off-books cartography prepared by the Jesuit mappings of 1979. But the door was real. It bore no knob, no visible hinges, just a single copper keyhole and a small brass plaque above it that read, I inserted the key. It turned once, easily. The door released with a slow inward sigh. Inside was a room the size of a small chapel, high stone ceiling, no windows, one wooden table, one solitary chair, a candle that had not melted in what looked like years, no dust, no decay. And on the walls parchment pages, hundreds of them, tacked in perfect symmetry, each page handwritten. In my script, they were prayers. Dozens I recognized. Some I had written as a boy, still studying under Father Lucenti in Siena. Others were more recent. Protocol blessings, sealing rites, emergency incantations used during spiritually volatile handovers. But others I had never seen before, or rather, I had never remembered writing them. The ink matched my style, the flourishes, the inconsistent spacing, even the spelling anomalies I was quietly ashamed of. I stepped closer, and in the center of the far wall, I found a prayer I knew could not exist, because it described the key, not metaphorically but with exact dimensions, its delivery, its temperature, my response. It concluded with the line, when Paolo returns to this room, he must not read the 11th line aloud. And just beneath it, a handwritten translation in Italian. I stepped back. Breath caught in my throat. I turned to leave. But the door was gone. The candle flickered violently. Not extinguished, never extinguished, but guttering as if something had entered with me. The pages began to hum. Not aloud. Internally, the way blood roars when silence becomes too deep. Then motion, not from the air, from the prayers themselves. They fluttered, one by one, but not as if moved by wind. It was as if they were breathing, tensing, watching. I tried not to look at the center wall again. I tried not to count to 11. But even averting my gaze, I knew where that line was. Because my own voice whispered it aloud. It did not come from my throat. It came from behind me. The same voice. My pitch. My inflection. But older. More tired. It read the 11th line. And the candle flared, bright as a star. For one suspended instant, the room cracked open not spatially, but sacramentally. The walls held, but the presence behind them withdrew some veil. And I saw, not an entity, not a demon, but a possibility. A vast liturgical awareness that had catalogued every prayer I had ever offered in honesty or pride. Every fragment of faith, of doubt, of ritual, learned by rote and forgotten with fatigue. It had collected them. It had archived me. The key had not opened a door. It had opened a record. I turned to flee and found the door restored. Still open, waiting. But as I stepped through, I felt a weight in my hand. The key. Still warm. Still mine. I logged nothing that night. I resealed the Codex Allegorum. I replaced the lights in Section 11 myself. When I returned to the wall behind the fire hose the following morning, there was no door, no seam. The plaster was intact. I burned the prayer in the vestibule incinerator, though something in me doubts that it mattered. Father Corsi has not mentioned the incident, nor has he asked why I no longer carry a key ring. Only the copper key remains. It will not leave my pocket. Once, in the weeks that followed, I passed a young cleric in the stairwell at 3:17 in the morning. He was muttering something under his breath. I stopped him gently. "What are you reciting?" He looked startled, then confused. "I'm not sure," he said. "I thought it was a prayer I learned in seminary, but the words, they change." I asked to see it. He unfolded a torn scrap of paper, written in my own hand. It said, "The door only appears when it's sure you'll enter." I told him to go home. I marked his name in a private log, and I returned to my desk, where the copper key had turned cold. We are not permitted to speak while sealing reliquaries because the wax remembers every word it hears. My name is Elena Riva. I am a second-generation restoration specialist assigned to the Musée Vatican's Sacred Object Reclamation Wing, Sublevel 2. My work is simple and solitary. I clean, repair, catalog, and, when instructed, reconsecrate aged relic housings with ecclesiastical wax. Unlike curators, I do not interpret. Unlike clergy, I do not bless. My hands are trusted, not my judgment. The vault where I serve is beneath the Pinacoteca, accessed only by spiral stair, always passed in silence. It smells of parchment, silver polish, and old incense. My station is a long stone room where broken reliquaries are queued like mute penitents. Some are cracked from age, others from misuse. Most are empty. The few that contain remains fingers, bones, a clot of cloth, darkened by centuries are marked by wax seals, scarlet or gold, never both. The seals are affixed after validation by the dicastery for the causes of saints. Every seal is a final word. Every seal has a voice. This is why we work alone, why we do not speak as we press the stamp, why the rite of the seal is done behind a screen, with a candle lit and the bell of silence rung once before we begin. That night, I was asked to reseal an item marked simply, no label, pre-council, priority, by order. It had no saint's name, no notation, no record. The reliquary itself was blackened bronze, no larger than a box of matches. The glass was cloudy, the hinge was fused, the seal had long since decayed. I was told to reseal it, nothing more. The rite of the seal begins with inspection. I lit the screen candle and donned the gloves. I examined the wax residuate was unusually thick, nearly 1 centimeter deep, cracked but intact in places. When I applied heat to soften it, the wax hissed as if moisture were trapped inside. A faint scent emerged, like old wood or pressed flowers but sharper, resinous. I recorded my observations. I read aloud the prescribed prayers of containment, not out of superstition but habit. Then I prepared the new wax. Vatican consecration wax is a blend of beeswax, frankincense ash, and chrism. It must be heated slowly, stirred clockwise, and never allowed to boil. As I stirred, I noticed that the melted wax shimmered not gold, not red, but copper-colored, though no such blend existed in my materials. I paused, checked the ingredients. All appeared correct. Still, the wax shimmered. I poured it onto the seal edge, let it settle, then reached for the stamplain bronze, bearing the seal of the Reclamation Office, a cross flanked by the letters C and V. As I pressed it into the wax, I felt a subtle vibration in my wrist. And then I heard it. A whisper. Not through the air, not echoing. It came from the reliquary itself, soft, clear, close to my ear. Ave Maria, 17 years ago, you said nothing. My hands stopped moving. I looked around. The vault was silent. I knew that voice. It was mine. I removed the stamp. The wax bore the seal perfectly formed. I backed away, trying to steady my breath. For a moment I considered marking the process incomplete and notifying the custodian. But the seal was made. I could not justify a report on a sound I may have imagined. Still, I could not leave it alone. Protocol states that resealing must be done once and only once. A second attempt voids the spiritual warranty, requiring the item to be re-examined by ecclesiastical tribunal. But I returned the next night. The wax remained firm. No cracking, no melting, but something had changed. The candle I had used was half melted, and I had replaced it the night before. They burned for 5 hours, never more. A small mark had appeared on my bench, a streak of wax across the logbook's margin. I had not recorded any spillage. And then I noticed the reliquary. It had shifted. Slightly. Not moved but tilted, as though the base beneath it had bent. The object inside the cloth bundle, I now saw had turned. It was facing me. I checked the screen bell, still on its hook. Out of compulsion, I heated the wax again. Not enough to remelt it, only to soften the edges. And then I pressed the seal a second time. The whisper returned, stronger now. Tuus est defectus. The file. You destroyed it. It was referring to a clerical error I had made 3 years ago. A misfiled dossier on a relic from Argentina. I had shredded it, unrecoverable, ashamed. No one else had known. I stepped back. You received confession twice in 2004. You omitted the third. The reliquary had no speaker, no amplifier, no moving parts. Just wax. The words were not accusation. They were inventory. I returned a third night. This time, the reliquary was already warm. I did not light the candle. I did not touch the wax. Still, the whisper came. No longer a whisper, not quite a voice. A presence pressed into the narrow silence of the chamber. You copied her signature to preserve your employment. That one I could not bear to hear again. I tried to cover the reliquary with linen. The whisper passed through the cloth. I attempted to move it to another chamber. The moment my gloves touched it, the metal turned cold, then hot enough to blister. I dropped it. The reliquary never struck the floor. It returned, untouched, to its place on the stone table. Then the lights dimmed. The seal on the reliquary began to blister and crack not from heat, but pressure. The wax flexed and split as if something beneath it was breathing. Every sin I had left unspoken filled the air. Some I barely remembered. Some I had buried deep, beyond even prayer. They returned, one by one, in my own voice. Not as judgment, but as proof. A litany, a confession I had never given. The bell was not rung, Elena. The seal was made without silence. The wax remembers. The screen candle relit itself, and the reliquary opened. Inside was no relic, only parchment, folded once, written in my handwriting, though I had never written it. Confess aloud and reseal. Or it remains open. I did not sleep that night. At Matins, I found myself in the chapel of St. Pius, kneeling beside a confessor who said nothing, only held my hand as I wept. I told him everything, even the small things, especially the ones I thought didn't matter. When I returned to the vault the next night, the reliquary had been removed. A linen tag was left in its place. No name, no archive code, just 3 Latin words. Signatum, auditum, tacitum. Sealed, heard, silenced. No one spoke of it. No new assignments were issued that week. I continue my work. My hands are steady again. I follow protocol exactly. Silence before the seal. Candle always lit. Bell rung, once, before wax is poured. And yet, there are moments, just as the stamp meets the wax, that I feel it again. That faint resistance, that subtle vibration in the air. As if something listens every time, waiting not to accuse, but to remember. There are doors in the basilica that were sealed with mortar and scripture, never to be opened, never to be acknowledged, not even by the clergy. I am Matteo Bruni, Internal Security Division, assigned to basilica-level duties since 2016. My role is observational and strictly non-interventional unless the red protocol is activated, which it never is. Not really. Not publicly. Our presence in St. Peter's Basilica is discreet. We wear plain black suits, communicate only by low-band earpiece, and maintain silent watch during papal ceremonies, processions, and high liturgy. We are trained to monitor threats of the earthly sort. Intrusion, Unrest, attempted theft. What we are not trained for, what is never discussed is what to do when a person vanishes without leaving the room. On Sunday, the 21st of October, during the 10th hour Mass, I was stationed to the left of the baldacchino near the chapel of St. Joseph. It was an ordinary assignment. The congregation was calm. The lighting was warm. Bishop Anselmo, a known and highly respected figure, had begun his homily from the ambo. His topic was silence. Specifically, the difference between silence born of awe and silence born of absence. I remember that distinctly now, because midway through his sentence amid breath, really his voice caught. Not in confusion or fatigue. It stopped like a note clipped by invisible scissors. Then he stepped down from the pulpit. And without acknowledging the altar, the Pope, or the congregation, he turned and walked not quickly, not urgently toward a small side door beneath the north apse. A door that has been bricked over since 1829. And he passed through it like it was still there. The moment he disappeared, there was no outcry, no panic, no alarm from the crowd. In fact, no one around me even reacted. They continued to sit, breathe, nod. Some bowed their heads in prayer. One child coughed, but not a single person turned to the door or registered that the bishop had vanished. Even the Pope remained still, as though the homily had never begun. I radioed my superior. Received no reply. I tapped my earpiece. Nothing. I stepped forward, half a pace, protocol be damned, but before I could leave position, Father Leon, who stood beside the bronze gate near the sacristy, gave me a single, slow shake of the head. He had seen it. I know he had. But his face remained expressionless, and he placed his hand quietly over the breast of his vestment, as if completing a private rite. After the Mass ended, I checked the service log. No mention of Bishop Anselmo. The homily section was left blank. I found this impossible. He had spoken for at least 3 minutes before vanishing. I reviewed the Basilica surveillance feed for the day. There was no audio. There never is inside the apse. But worse, there was no footage of the moment he disappeared. At the timestamp where he faltered, the camera skips, just 1 frame forward. He's gone. And the congregation doesn't blink. That evening, I returned during lockdown. I convinced a junior sacristan to let me do a perimeter sweep for structural cracks, a half-truth that would not be questioned. I made my way toward the side door. In daylight, it's easy to overlook. A simple bricked arch below a faded plaque bearing the name Porta Mudorumda, Door of the Silent. Records say it was sealed in the year 1829 after a restoration incident involving improper anchoring and a minor floor collapse. But there are murmurs, 2 archived letters from Cardinal Zucconi referencing an incident during 3rd hour Mass, the bishop who answered nothing. I knelt to inspect the bricks. They were old, crumbling in places, but dry. Then I noticed something odd, a smear of recent wax across one of the lower stones, not more than 2 days old. Red, but dulled. Vatican wax does not age like that. It seemed as though the seal had burned through, applied, then resisted. I scraped a bit with a gloved hand. The scent that rose up was unmistakable, myrrh and old incense. And beneath the layer of soot, a faint symbol became visible, scratched into the mortar, as if hurriedly, a pair of wings with no body. That's when the lights above me dimmed, not all at once, just the chandeliers directly over the apse. The silence thickened. I looked around the vast basilica, empty, and yet not. The air near the bricked wall felt pressurized, as though the very stone was holding its breath. I whispered a prayer, then stepped away. As I did, I heard 3 soft knocks from behind the wall, and a voice, no loud, not aggressive, just tired. "Permettite me finire. Let me finish." I reported nothing. I marked my nightly sweep as routine. But the next day, I returned. The door was sealed again, but differently. The bricks had been smoothed. The plaque was gone. No trace of wax, no symbol. It was as if the basilica had decided to forget. I confronted Father Leone. I asked him directly, quietly, respectfully about the bishop, about what we had seen. He looked at me for a long time. Then he asked, "What makes you think he left?" I didn't answer. He continued, "There are doors for entering, there are doors for leaving, and there are doors meant only to be noticed by those who guard them." He handed me a folded piece of parchment, unstamped, blank on the outside. Inside it read, "Porta mutorum est viva, non loquitur, sed audet." The door of the silent is alive. It does not speak, but it hears. Beneath the phrase was a list faded, inked by hand. At the top, Anselmo G. At the bottom, Bruni M. No dates, no explanations, just names. Mine was last. I have remained on duty. I never speak near that wall now. I change the patrol route to avoid it whenever I can. When new recruits ask about the archway, I say it leads to maintenance. No one corrects me. There is no more homily scheduled for the 10th hour Mass on the 21st of October. The calendar simply reads, Silent Prayer. Sometimes, during early Vespers, I stand near the chapel of St. Joseph and look toward the space where the bishop stepped through. I imagine I can still hear his voice, lingering faintly at the edges of the sanctuary. A sentence interrupted, never finished. There is a silence deeper than reverence. That is where he stopped. And sometimes, just before closing, I hear footsteps behind the wall. 3 slow steps. And then nothing. But I no longer reach for my radio. I only place my hand on my chest, like Father Leone did. And I listen. The manuscript had no title, only a red binding and the Vatican seal half burned into its spine, but every morning, its list of names was slightly different. The day I found my own, it was written in darker ink than the rest. My name is Lucia Ferretti. I am one of 7 senior archivists granted clearance for the Sotto Indice, the unofficial sub-index of texts considered too unstable, too morally disruptive, or too unexplainable to reside in the main apostolic archive. We do not speak openly of these texts, not even among ourselves. Some are locked behind relic glass that fogs in the presence of breath. Some require a special benediction to open, a brief Latin prayer authorized by the Secretariat. Others, like the manuscript I was assigned in early October of 2024, carry no name, just a red label and a handling protocol printed on worn linen paper. I was assigned Codex 573R at 900 hours on a Thursday. It came in a sealed brass box, accompanied by 2 items, a leather-bound logbook and a copper key attached to a chain. The box itself was housed in the deep vault, a tier of the archive that lies beneath the modern filing chambers, accessed by a lift that requests confirmation not with a keycard, but with a verbal liturgical phrase, ad verbum non ultra. I followed the procedure precisely. White gloves, single candle, isolation chamber door closed from the outside by my assistant, who waited in the adjoining vestibule. I opened the manuscript, recorded its first 4 pages in the logbook, and, as instructed, left it untouched on its pedestal overnight. By the next morning, 1 name had changed. At first, I suspected transcription error. The text resembled the ledger names, locations, and dates handwritten in immaculate uncial Latin, but the spacing was uncanny, uniform, deliberate, no ink blotting, no smudges. The list began in the 14th century, with names of clergy, obscure monks, and individuals marked anonymous with short Latin footnotes that hinted at disciplinary action or extraordinary phenomena. The change I saw was subtle. A name I remembered, Father Alonso degli Spiriti, dated 1721, had been replaced with Frater Ignotus. The rest of the line was identical. I consulted the logbook. I had written it correctly. The manuscript had rewritten itself. I checked the room's temperature and humidity sensors, all within tolerance. I lit a second candle and placed it near the binding, just as we're taught to do when texts exhibit autonomous activity. The flame bent slightly toward the manuscript and stayed that way like it was breathing. By the third day, 4 names had changed. One of them was Bishop Nicola Rinaldi, a man I'd met twice before he was reassigned without notice in 2022. His name had not been there before, but there it was now. Dated exactly 1 day before the morning he vanished from his post. I attempted Containment Protocol 2A, replacing the manuscript inside its brass case, and marking the outer tag as Resurgence, a designation used when a text reactivates after dormancy. But the case would no longer close. It hummed faintly when I brought the copper key near the lock, and a brief pressure built in my ears like altitude sickness. I placed both hands on the box and whispered the prescribed verse from Psalm 139. The lid dropped shut of its own accord. The lock clicked. I brought the case to Father Gerhardt in oversight. He reviewed my findings in silence, reading only the logbook. When he was done, he closed the book and said, "Do not attempt to reopen it. You will receive further instruction. Until then, you are assigned to the Codex room under standard hours." I did as I was told. For 6 days, I shelved microfilm, cataloged damaged parchment, and translated French marginalia. Then, just before prime, on the 7th day, I received a sealed envelope delivered by hand. No sender, just my name, and the phrase, ad verbum non ultra. Inside was the copper key. The vault was colder than usual that night. The lift hesitated twice on the descent. When I spoke the access phrase, I felt my mouth go dry, as though something in the stone corridor below had responded with its own silent utterance. The manuscript was already on the pedestal when I arrived. The candle was lit, though I had not asked my assistant to do so, and the book was open. To the final page, the ink was still damp. I counted the entries. 372. I traced my finger down to the bottom line. Lucia Ferretti, Archivum Vaticanum, Vigilia Sancte Lucia. Date: tomorrow. I felt the heat leave my body in waves, like the spirit withdrawing from the flesh. I did not scream. I did not run. I stood in silent awe, breathing only when I had to. Then, as if performing the most ordinary task in the world, I turned the page. Blank. Completely blank. But I understood something then, not in words, but in some deeper organ of knowing. The names were not a record. They were a liturgy, not a history, but a call. And my name was now part of the invocation. I closed the book gently, placed the copper key beside it, and stepped back. Behind me, I heard the click of the vault door locking itself. I was found on the floor of the vestibule the next morning, seated upright, my gloves folded neatly in my lap. No one could explain how I had exited the vault. The surveillance feed from the corridor had gone dark at 3:17 in the morning and resumed exactly 33 minutes later. The manuscript was no longer inside. Father Gerhardt submitted a single-line entry into the red ledger, Codex 573R, status transferred to Section Lumen. I was never asked to return. Now I work in a quiet scriptorium on the edge of the Vatican gardens. My duties involve duplicating ancient breviaries by hand, a task once reserved for novices. No one has spoken to me about what happened. But some nights, just after Vespers, I sit beneath the olive trees and think about the names on that list. How many were remembered? How many were rewritten? And what it means to have been centrally seen by something older than Scripture, older than language itself. Last week, a young seminarian left a note for me under my door. It was unsigned. It read, "The list has resumed. It began with yours, and it's writing again." At exactly 3:17 each morning, A hallway in the eastern wing of the Apostolic Palace begins to glow not from within, but as if illuminated by a source no longer present in this world. I have served as a priest librarian in the Vatican Library for over 20 years, with the last 6 spent in restricted restoration. That means I handle texts too fragile, too obscure, or too theologically volatile for general review. Most of my work is solitary and silent deep in the subarchives, or high in the locked lofts of the Apostolic Palace. I consider the stillness a form of prayer. My cell is modest. My hours are fixed. I take my meal at dusk and enter the archives just before compline. It is a quiet duty, a sacred rhythm. Yet in 2021, a change in assignments placed me on temporary residency in the eastern residential wing, an older part of the palace, seldom used. Renovation, they said. An airshaft problem near the usual priest quarters. Nothing unusual. But from my very first night there, I noticed a corridor near the stairwell at the end of the hall. It was narrow, with 4 shuttered windows facing the inner courtyard. The corridor had no name on the map and was absent from the archive floor plans. It seemed to serve no functional purpose. And yet, each night, just after 3:15, light began to gather in it, neither lamp nor moon, but a pale, wavering radiance that looked like candlelight seen through tears. I asked no questions. In the Vatican, not every question is permitted a voice. The first few nights, I avoided the corridor. I would rise from matins, glance toward it from my door, and return to bed without stepping near. But the light was persistent, always beginning at precisely 3:17, and always receding just before 4. I began timing it. I noted the moments. The illumination began not with a flicker, but with a breath-like light pressing outward from something long buried. More unsettling still was the way the shadows bent. They did not follow the angles of the sconces or the moon, but coiled along the base of the walls as if dragging behind something invisible. One morning, after too little sleep, I broke the rule I had made for myself. I stepped into the corridor. The air was neither cold nor warm, but disturbingly still. The stone beneath my slippers felt slightly damp, though there had been no rain. When I moved forward, I noticed something strange. The shadows did not follow me. They held their shape as though I hadn't disturbed them at all. And then there was the light itself. It behaved like water. As I stepped into its path, it parted around me gently, bending along the folds of my cassock. It did not strike my face. It pooled beside me. I stood there for nearly 2 minutes, staring into it, breathing slowly. Something watched me, though I saw no one. By the 5th night, I had begun waking at 3:17 without the alarm. Always the same, a faint pressure in the chest, a whisper of air down the nape of my neck, and the sound, though this I cannot prove, of pages turning somewhere behind the walls. I consulted the Archivum Nocturnum, a little-known registry of anomalous architectural features within Vatican City. The corridor was not listed. I checked the registry of suppressed construction, chapels walled up, apartments sealed, and causeways redirected after desecration or disuse. Again, nothing. I submitted a minor facilities report, careful in my language, discrepancy in light flow pattern in East Residential Wing, possibly due to outdated electric fixtures. I knew better than to mention anything less secular. The response I received was brief. Corridor 3E remains operational. Do not enter after hours. Maintenance deferred indefinitely. That was the first time I saw it named. Corridor 3E. A designation means containment. Containment means history. I began to notice other things. My candles flickered at exactly the same angle each night. The psalter I kept by my bed sometimes felt warm to the touch, specifically during the hour of light. And once, while reciting Psalm 77 aloud in my cell, my voice doubled itself, not echoed, but harmonized, as if someone or something repeated each line a breath behind me. In the morning, a fresh white thread had been placed across my door's lock, seam intact, unbroken. I had not placed it there. It was on the 12th night that I walked the full length of the corridor. I wore my stole and carried no lantern, trusting the light that came unbidden. The moment I entered, the glow deepened like the thickening of incense. I counted 7 windows. I touched none of them. Though I could see the courtyard beyond, no stars shone in it. The windows reflected only the corridor itself, never me. Halfway down, I heard music. Not melody, but resonancia, single, sustained note like the faint hum of a bowed glass or an organ warming before a mass. It came not from ahead, but beneath. I knelt and pressed my palm to the stone floor. It pulsed, faint and steady, like a distant heartbeat. At the final window, I saw a mark in the dust. Just one. A bare footprint, faint and incomplete, facing the wall. I turned. The corridor behind me was gone. In its place, darkness. Not absence of light, but something thicker, textured, the kind of dark one finds behind the eyelids of a corpse. I stepped backward. The glow parted again like water, folding around my ankles as I moved. And then I heard my name. Not spoken, written. It arrived in my mind as ink spilled in slow motion across an unseen page. Giacomo de Rossi. Beneath it, a date. March the 12th, 2021. That was today. The corridor held its breath. I reached for my rosary, but my fingers found nothing. I opened my mouth, but no sound escaped, not even the name. The corridor had become a sanctuary of silence. I do not remember leaving. I remember only kneeling again before my bed, the light of morning spilling across the psalter. The page was open to Psalm 88. Shall thy wonders be known in the dark, and thy righteousness in the land of forgetfulness? My name had been scrawled faintly in the margin in my own hand. I submitted no further reports. I requested reassignment to the lower archives 2 weeks later. It was granted without hesitation. No explanation was asked of me. Corridor 3E was never mentioned again. But in the months that followed, I began noticing names. On slips tucked into volumes that should have had no insert. On unused checkout cards and books sealed for decades. On the backs of icons too brittle to handle. Always in the same copper-red ink. Names of priests, names of archivists. Some I knew, some I had never met. And sometimes just once or twice I saw my own name again. Each time, the date beside it changed. Each time, it grew closer. We are told not to linger near the Sistine Chapel after midnight, not for reverence, but because it listens. My name is Alberti Ruggieri. I've worked Vatican security since 2007. My post rotates among the various wings and courtyards, but I am almost always assigned night shifts. Fewer visitors, fewer variables, fewer chances for anything unsanctioned to slip by unseen. There is a rhythm to the darkness here, like the turning of pages you don't remember opening. Midnight patrol is solemn, nearly liturgical. You pass by frescoes that once stared at Michelangelo's hands. You whisper the code phrases at checkpoints like prayers. Veritas ostendit, and wait for the green light to flash. You log the hour, the corridor, the silence. The Sistine Chapel lies dormant most nights, sealed by 3 layers of access, and watched on 3 angles of surveillance. I've never seen anyone attempt to approach it. Not even the cardinals. It's not fear. It's respect, quiet, unspoken, as if even our footsteps avoid disrupting something deeper than history. But there's a second protocol, something less official. We're briefed on it only once during clearance review. It isn't written down. It's spoken by an old Monsignor who looks over your shoulder, never at your eyes. If you hear singing from within the Sistine Chapel after hours, do not investigate. Log the time. Notify no one. Keep walking. If the singing stops when you near, you have already gone too far. I heard the chant for the first time on the 11th of March, 2023. I just passed Checkpoint Hestia near the Hall of Blessings. logging it at exactly 3:12 a.m. That section gives you a direct southern line toward the side of the chapel. The hallway was silent, save for the soft creak of my boots. Then came the sound-low, harmonic, impossibly old Gregorian chant. It was so faint I thought I'd imagined it. But it wasn't a recording. I know the acoustics of the palace. This was physical, drifting from somewhere real. The tone wasn't mournful or triumphant. It was still, like the moment after a bell tolls. I froze. Every instinct told me to keep walking, to obey the oral protocol, but there was something in the chant that didn't feel foreign. It felt invited, as though some part of me had been waiting to hear it my whole life. I took one step closer. The chant did not falter. Another step. Still, it carried. The hallway ended at the side vestibulia security door, with reinforced panels and biometric access. I stood there, hand near my badge, listening. The chant was clearer now. Latin, yes, but not words I recognized. Ancient phrasing, maybe even pre-Christian modes. Then something changed. The chant rose slightly in volume, as though it had noticed me. The harmony bent inward, almost like an inhalation. I didn't look back, and I didn't log it. But I returned the next night. On the 12th of March, I altered my patrol timing slightly. I claimed electrical interference in Corridor 3. No one checked. At 3:14 a.m. I stood again before the same vestibule. The singing began at 3:16. This time, it was fuller. More voices. A cathedral's worth, layered in perfect unison. There was no surveillance anomaly, nothing caught on audio. I checked. I even reviewed the tapes from the night before. Silence. But I heard it with my own ears, and I wasn't the only one. At breakfast, I sat beside Tommaso, another guard, 10 years my senior. We made small talk about weather and patrol dogs. Then he quietly slid a matchbox across the table. On it was written a single number, 317. If you keep listening, he said without lifting his eyes, you will eventually be allowed inside. I asked him nothing more. I never saw him again. On the third night, I made my decision. It was the 13th of March. I arrived early and stood still, alone, before the chapel's side vestibule. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the chant began again, but this time, with no muffling, no distance. It was right there, behind the door. I pressed my badge to the panel. Nothing. I whispered, almost without thinking, the words Tommaso had said, I wish to be allowed inside. There was no mechanical click, no motor sound, just a gentle sigh of air. The vestibule door drifted open. Beyond it lay the Sistine Chapel, dark and hollow. Except it was not empty. Rows of robed figures stood along the pews, all facing forward, all singing. The harmony reverberated not just through my ears but through my ribs. I stepped inside, slowly, reverently. The air was warm with incense that had not been lit. The paintings overhead glowed with a soft, silver Huguenot moonlight, but something older. Then the figures turned, not all at once, but row by row, as if rehearsed. And as they faced me, still singing, I saw what I had not been prepared to see. They had no faces. Where eyes and mouths and expressions should have been, there was smooth white stone, marble, veined slightly like flesh. Some bore small indentations where a nose might have formed. Others had the faint imprint of what once might have been tears. But there were no features, just cold, sculpted blankness. Still, they sang. And then, in one synchronized motion, they bowed. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't menace. It was recognition. As they straightened, I heard the chant shift. A word surfaced from the harmony. One I knew. Alberti. Not shouted, not whispered. Sung, like liturgy. Over and over. Alberti! 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 I backed away. The song did not follow Mebut. The door did not close either. Until I whispered, I do not accept. Only then did the threshold vanish like mist, and the chant fell into silence. I filed no report. No audio anomaly was ever recorded. No door access was ever logged. I claimed fatigue and took a 2-week reassignment near the Vatican Gardens. No one questioned it. Tommaso's quarters were emptied by the time I checked. All that remained was a folded sheet of parchment, bearing the faint impression of a face pressed into it, as if by breath, not ink. The Sistine Chapel remained sealed, but some nights, when my rounds take me near its walls, I stop, I listen, and I hear my name, sung not as warning, not as praise, but as invitation. The clocks in the catacombs are forbidden to chime, yet one of them calls my name at exactly 3:17 each morning. I am Father Aurelio Santini. My duties fall not in the grandeur of basilicas or public rites, but in the still, chalk-dusted quiet beneath them. I serve in the restricted catacomb corridors, rarely trodden by light or breath, where relics too delicate, too controversial, or too potent for display are kept behind sealed gates. My title is Custodian Ecclesia Subterranea, Keeper of the Underground Church. My work is equal parts spiritual and archival. I log temperature fluctuations around ancient reliquaries. I inspect the wax of seals. I light the votive candles before vaults that bear no names. The passages stretch endlessly, walls thick with dust, lined with shelves and gates, and branching like veins beneath the Vatican. These catacombs predate many of the buildings above them. Every corridor has its hour. Each wing is assigned its time of daily inspection, always rotated, never overlapping. My rotation had recently placed me in the eastern vault sector known in records as Corpus Avum. Most of it is inert. Boxes of bones, forgotten papal seals, the crumbling shrouds of beatified martyrs. The air there is thick with damp limestone and the scent of extinguished myrrh. It is not a place for sound. Which is why, on the first night I heard the bell, I stopped walking mid-step. The sound came gently at first. One chime, then silence. Not from the surfacino echo through the stairwell, no metallic resonance through stone. It came from within the catacombs, ahead of me, down the deepest path that ends at the old iron gate, the one we are instructed never to approach. I checked my watch. 3:17 a.m. The next night it came again. One note, like the toll of a sanctuary bell struck with reverence, but soft-edged, as if the bell were cracked or half buried in soil. I made no record of it, not out of fear, but because I could not bear the silence that followed writing it down. When I moved my pen to the page, it was as though something was reading over my shoulder, watching my ink. By the 5th night, I asked one of the other custodians, Father Brinzi, an old Jesuit with trembling hands, whether he'd ever heard it. He paused, then simply said, "If the bell tolls for you, Father Santini, do not answer it by name." And that was all. The nights blurred together. Each inspection drew me deeper down that eastern corridor, where the electric lights flickered more often, and the plaster bore strange cracks in the shape of words I could not translate. And always, at 3:17, the bell tolled once. The Vatican denies any functioning bell mechanism in the catacombs. There is no liturgical purpose for such a thing, and yet each toll had the weight of a ritual fulfilled. I began to notice other changes. The iron gate, heavy and rust-sealed, looked cleaner each night. At first, just less dust. Then the padlock seemed newer. One evening, I found the gate faintly warm to the touch, as if it had recently been handled. And the strangest part, above the archway, in the ancient stone, were etched the Latin words, Praeteritum nomen expectat. The forgotten name awaits. But that inscription had not been there before. I would have noted it. I began waking from sleep at 3:17 sharp, heart pounding, even on nights off duty. There was no sound in my room, but the toll echoed in my head, and always in the same pitch, C sharp, sustained and sorrowful. One evening, I stayed in the catacombs after my shift. I brought a chair, a candle, a notebook. I sat facing the iron gate. I did not move. I waited. The chime came again. But this time, I heard something after. A voice. Not in speech, but in breath. Confess. On the 12th night, I crossed the line. I brought the master keys. I should not have had them, but I had watched how the senior custodian handled the ring. I had memorized the combination. There were 3 keys needed to breach the gate at the end of Corpus Avum, each stamped with an archangel's name. At 3:16 a.m., I stood before the gate, my breath clouded in the cold. The inscription above it shimmered faintly, as if absorbing the candlelight. And then the bell rang. It did not come from ahead but from behind me, down the corridor I had just walked. I turned. No one. Just the candlelight stretching too long behind me, shadows leaning forward, as if pulled toward the gate. When I turned back, the gate was open. The lock sat on the floor. The hinges had not made a sound. I stepped inside. There was no dust. The chamber was circular, lined with alcoves, and in each alcove stood a tall bronze clock, dozens of them, some cracked, others pristine. None ticked. Except one. Its hands moved backwards. And inscribed where the numerals should have been were names. Dozens. Hundreds, some ancient, others newly etched. I scanned them without meaning to. My eyes moved on their own. Then they stopped. Aurelio Santini. Etched at the 12 o'clock mark. The clock struck. Not once, but 17 times. Yet no time passed. I blinked. The air inside was heavier now, pressing on my lungs. Then something stepped into view from the far side of the circle. I could not see its face, only its robe, black, wet with something that did not glisten. It pointed to the clock. I tried to ask what it wanted, but I had no voice. My throat was sealed like wax. The entity took a step forward. As it moved, each clock began ticking again, but all out of sync, each voice of time clashing against the other. My name began to melt down the surface of the nearest dial, dripping like blood. Then the candle in my hand extinguished, and something behind me whispered in the pitch of the bell, "You are now part of the measure." They found me seated at my desk in the upper crypts. I had no memory of walking there. I held a broken timepiece in my left hand. The hour hand pointed to nothing. I told no one. I resumed my duties in another wing. But each morning at 3:17 a.m., I still hear it, whether in my room or in the garden or deep in St. Peter's own soft chime, as though from within my own chest. The master keys I used that night are now missing. Last week, a young deacon asked if I knew anything about a passage labeled Praeteritum Nomen Expectat. I told him no. But later that night, I left a sealed envelope in his drawer. It held one instruction written in trembling ink. If the clock rings, do not listen to the 13th chime. He will ignore it, of course. We all do, until the hour finds us. They warned us never to meet our own reflection in a relic's glass, only to clean by hand, never by eye. My name is Pietro Mancini. I have worked in the Vatican's Office of Sacred Conservation since the spring of 2009. I preserve, polish, and on occasion repair the fragile vessels that cradle our church's most treasured relics. There are rules, of course, not rules of bureaucracy, but sacred ones spoken in low Latin, or jotted without names in a red-threaded binder kept in a locked cabinet, marked Custodia Interior. I've followed those rules for 16 years without deviation. We do not touch the inner reliquary. We do not peer too long into the display glass. We do not, under any circumstance, clean alone after midnight. The St. Lucia chamber is one of our most modest displays: 3 reliquaries, 1 unlit oil lamp, and a single kneeler behind a red velvet rope. It sits beneath the northern chapel, buried under 4 layers of limestone, unseen by pilgrims. It is meant to be preserved, not visited. 2 weeks ago, Father Sebastiani asked me to attend to an unusual request. A light fog forming inside the central display. Humidity where there should be none. I was granted access under standard protocol: white gloves, candlelight only, record every gesture. And as always, I was to begin with the sign of the cross before unlocking the case. The relic within was a finger bone, delicate, brown, and encased in a sealed field of blown Venetian glass. Labeled Digitus Sanctae Adrianae, 2nd century. The label alone meant caution. That level of antiquity comes with rules older than the church itself. The first time I noticed the discrepancy, I dismissed it as fatigue. I moved my hand to wipe a fingerprint from the outer glass pane, and for a split second, the reflection lagged behind. I blinked. It caught up. I checked the lamp. Flame, steady. No tremor in the chamber. No hidden second pane that might cause an echo or distortion. Still, something lingered in the rhythm of the momenta, as if my motion had briefly become someone else's to mimic. I closed the case, wrote my notes, and chalked the rest up to tired nerves. But when I returned the following evening, same hour, same gloves, same breath held in ritual, the delay repeated itself. Only this time, it was longer. When I reached to polish the inner corner of the display glass, the reflection of my hand did not move. I froze. My real fingers hung in mid-air. In the glass, their mirrored twin remained still, suspended a second or two behind. Then gently the reflection began to move. It matched the arc of my hand with eerie precision, but it was no longer reactive, it was rehearsed. I stepped back. There was no wind, no candle flicker. The lamp's flame stood tall as a priest's spine, and inside the reliquary, the bone had shifted position. Only by a fraction, but enough to break its alignment with the silk pillow beneath. I didn't tell anyone. I submitted my report, sanitized of doubt, and asked to be reassigned to the textile cases in the Benedictine wing. Father Sebastiani, perhaps reading the tension in my voice, simply nodded. But I wasn't reassigned. The request was ignored or maybe overridden. 2 days later, I was summoned again. That night, I brought a colleague with me, Elena Viscara, junior conservator, newly trained, sharp-eyed, and devout. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I only said I needed an extra set of hands. We entered together at 10 minutes past midnight. The rules permit presence after the bell of Compline, provided there are 2 witnesses and all rites are observed. We lit the lamp, unlocked the display, and began our careful, silent work. I asked Elena to observe the bone while I polished the interior. "Watch it closely," I said. "Tell me if anything shifts." She frowned, perhaps amused by my seriousness, but agreed. I moved slowly, cloth in hand. No condensation this time, no flicker. But when I reached the lower right corner of the glass, I saw it again, my reflection half a beat behind. Not just in the fingers, but in the breath. I inhaled, and the image waited, then exhaled without me. "Elena," I whispered, "do you see that?" But she didn't answer. I turned toward her. She had not moved. She stood fixed, mouth slightly open, staring directly into the relic. "Elena." Stillness. I walked around her and looked into the case. The bone was upright, now leaning slightly, impossibly within the sealed file. It was watching her. I do not mean this metaphorically. It was tilted in such a way that it reflected her face perfectly in the glass. "Elena." My voice broke this time. She blinked, stepped back, and shook her head as if waking. "Sorry. I thought I heard something," she said. We packed up immediately, left the cloths unwashed, logged nothing. The next morning, her locker was empty. I tried to find her. I asked her roommate at the Domus gone. I asked Father Sebastiani transferred. I checked the duty logs. Her name had been erased from the rota, redacted by hand, not type. That night, I returned alone. I knew I was breaking the rule. I entered the Lucha chamber at precisely 3:15 a.m., lit the lamp, and knelt before the relic. No gloves, no tools. Just me, the glass, and the bone. The reflection waited. I raised my hand and there it was. That second self, always late, always watching. Except this time, I did not move. And still, my reflection raised its own hand. It pressed its palm to the glass. I felt nothing against my skin, only the dread that comes when a truth too old to name becomes suddenly, crushingly present. Inside the phial, the finger bone turned. Not fell, not rolled. It turned, slowly, with impossible grace. The silk beneath it rippled without disturbance. I opened my mouth to pray, and the reflection did the same. Inly it moved before I did. A split second early, mouth open in my voice. I whispered, Sancta Adriana, ora pro nobis. And the glass fogged. From the inside, behind it, where no moisture should live, a cloud of condensation formed in the shape of a breath. It traced a perfect oval, like a mouth preparing to speak. I stood and stepped back. I left the lamp burning. I did not record the visit. I told no one. 3 days later, the St. Lucia chamber was sealed for maintenance. I have not been permitted back. Elena never returned. Her name no longer appears on any Vatican payroll or clearance registry. When I asked a colleague in human resources, he gave me a strange look and said, there was never an Elena Viscari in sacred conservation, but her locker key still hangs on the board. Sometimes, when I pass the sealed door of the Lucia chamber, I pause. The glass slit in the iron frame is dark, but faintly only when the hallway is empty, I hear the soft tap of a finger from inside. A single beat behind my footsteps. So I keep walking. I don't clean the glass anymore. I let it remember. There is no official record of room 4, yet the keys are still signed out. My name is Serena Valenti. I've been with the Vatican Guard since the year 2012, assigned to interior rotation. I am not Swiss nor ceremonial. My duties fall somewhere between logistics and surveillance, the unspoken tasks that keep the older halls undisturbed. I was 26 when I was first given access to Piano Vecchio, the old floor, which lies below the public museums and above the buried catacombs. We call it a floor, but it's more a level of forgotten transition, wide stone halls without plaques, doorways numbered but not labeled, and rooms that are always locked unless someone says otherwise. On my weekly schedule, I assisted in nighttime deliveries packets from one office to another, often encoded, double-signed, sometimes carried in leather satchels bound with wax seals. You don't ask what they are. You don't wait to be thanked. There was a kind of reverence in this quiet repetition, gloved hands, vaulted ceilings, the sound of your boots on cold marble at 2 a.m. The Vatican, at that hour, felt less like a city and more like a living reliquary, a place that breathed in prayers and exhaled silence. Everyone joked about room 4. Not its contents, no one knew those, but the simple fact that it was always locked, yet always on the list, even when it hadn't been entered for years. We'd pass it on rounds and say, still waiting to be reassigned. I laughed too, until the night I was given the key. It was on a Thursday, the 29th of October, 2022, that my name appeared beside Consegna Straordinaria, a special delivery. Midnight post, 2 items, no recipient listed. The clerk at the duty desk handed me a thin folder bound with copper thread. No seal, no stamp, just a handwritten note. Room 4, archive floor. He only added, almost as an afterthought, you'll need this. He slid a single iron key across the marble. It was older than the others, worn smooth with age. A 4 had been etched by hand into the head, shallow and uneven. I turned it over. No other markings. I didn't ask questions. You don't, when you've worn the uniform long enough. The elevator to the archive floor took longer than usual. The descent was uneven, stopping briefly between levels with a mechanical jolt that made the walls hum. When the doors finally opened, the hallway was darker than it should have been, a few lamps flickering on automatic timers, others simply unlit. The door to room 4 was at the far end, just as it had always been, unadorned, heavy, and untouched. I knocked once, waited, and inserted the key. The lock resisted, not rusted, but reluctant, like it hadn't been turned in decades. When it finally gave, the door opened inward without a sound. Inside, there was nothing but chairs. Dozens of them, arranged in rows facing an empty wall. Wooden, with red cushions, all identical. At the back of the room was a small table with an oil lamp, unlit, and a lectern but no altar, no books, no cross. Just the chairs. Empty. Still. I stepped in and closed the door behind me. I placed the folder on the lectern. Procedure complete. I should have turned and left. But the stillness was different here. It had a weight, like mass without gravity. The silence held shape. There was no ventilation hum, no echo. I could hear the blood in my ears. I scanned the room again. Nothing moved. But my name was spoken. Softly. Not aloud. Not quite. It was like when someone whispers your name across the surface of water, slightly warped, just out of reach, but unmistakable. Serena. It came again, from beneath the floor. I froze, then listened. There were voices, faint and overlapping, like a prayer, murmured by many mouths, just underfoot. They did not rise in volume. They did not grow frantic. They only were. I stepped back toward the door. A sudden tremor beneath my right foot made me flinch, not a quake of vibration, a subtle, rhythmic pulse, and then another. It was a pattern, not seismic, mechanical, a ticking. I crouched slowly and placed my hand to the ground. The marble was cold, but underneath it was movement, small and precise, like clockwork. I followed the sensation across the room. Under the third row of chairs, it was strongest. I crouched, inspecting the floor. The grout lines were seamless, but the sound was unmistakable now, a slow, measured ticking, like a grandfather clock with no chime. Except it was getting louder. And then, once, only once it rang. A single bell, clear, deep. It stopped my breath. Not in my ears, in my ribs, as if the sound had come from within me. I stood abruptly, heart pounding. The room was unchanged, but all the chairs were now facing me. I don't remember turning, I don't remember breathing, but the room was watching me, if not with eyes, then with posture. The quiet hum beneath the floor had become a drone. I tried the door, locked. I hadn't locked it. Behind me, the oil lamp flickered to life. I hadn't lit it. Its flame danced slowly, without smoke, casting a glow that stretched long shadows from the chairs now towering, thin, like silent judges. I heard my name again, not from below, but from the chairs themselves, each one murmuring Serena in that same submerged cadence. A memory surfaced. In 2016, a senior guard had been quietly reassigned, Brother Domenico. No ceremony. One night, he simply didn't report. We were told he had accepted monastic retreat. I'd believed it until now. A second bell rang. This time, the flame extinguished. The room went completely dark, not absence of light, but presence of shadow, thick and absolute. Still, I could feel the chairs, their arrangement, their anticipation. And then I heard the papers open. The folder I had placed on the lectern. I couldn't see it, but I heard its string uncoil and its contents shift. Then came the sound of pen on paper. Slow, careful, writing something. I stepped forward blindly, reaching for the source. My hand touched the lectern's edge. Another page turned. Another line written. The hum below shifted into a harmony, voices layered with breathless precision, saying nothing I could understand. but pulsing with syllables that felt older than language. I shouted, I confess this, I shouted the Sanctus, loud and cracked from fear. Sanctus, 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 Dominus, Deus Sabaoth. Everything stopped. Silence. The door unlocked behind me with a loud metallic click. I turned. The hallway was lit again. I did not look back. They never asked for the key's return. Room 4 vanished from the delivery list a week later. When I brought it up to a clerk I trusted, he held my gaze too long and said only, "You were never assigned there." The folder was never recovered. But a week after the incident, I received a new posting, not a promotion, not a punishment, just a quiet reassignment to a higher floor. Fewer deliveries, less night work. Sometimes, though, in the early hours of the morning, I hear a single bell. It always rings at 3:17. And on a few occasions, I've found my name written in the margins of rosters where I do not belong. Handwritten, neat, like someone is keeping notes from a room that doesn't exist. We are taught never to read a liturgical scroll aloud, unless we know where it ends and when. My name is Father Lorenzo Bianchi. I have served in the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, the Vatican Secret Archives, for over 19 years. I was trained not as a priest first, but as a custodian of ink, parchment, and prayer. Here, in the lower chambers beneath St. Peter's Basilica, we preserve that which is too sacred, too dangerous, or too misunderstood for public view. Each archivist is entrusted with a domain. Mine is the codices sacros non repetendos, the unrepeating sacred text liturgical works that, once read aloud, must not be recited again, lest they distort the ritual cycle. Some are bound in skin, others etched into tin or scratched into the backs of ancient icons. They are holy, yes, but not always benign. Our protocols are simple. Do not read aloud unless the final benediction is marked. Do not read in darkness, and never, under any circumstance, continue a prayer past the word Amen unless the rubric explicitly instructs it. On the evening in question, May the 12th, 2024, I was assigned to verify a scroll unearthed from beneath the floor of the suppressed Cappella di Sant'Urbano, a chamber sealed since the plague of 1798. The scroll bore no title, just a red wax stamp, faded Latin inscriptions, and a catalog number that had been struck through 3 times. I began my examination at exactly 9 p.m. in Vault C, under the glow of a single beeswax candle. The scroll was dry, cracked, but surprisingly intact. The ink shimmered faintly in the light, not gold, not silver, but something with a faint iridescence, like the underside of a dove's feather. It began, as many do, with invocation. Domine, aperi labia mea. Lord, open my lips. Standard, familiar. The lines that followed moved through a penitential psalm, a Kyrie, and what resembled a Eucharistic prayer, though stripped of any reference to bread or wine. Instead, it spoke of senses, memoria, and verbum, the senses, memory, and the word. Then came the first Amen. I looked for a rubric, none. Still, the prayer continued naturally, flowing into what seemed a second preface. I turned back to the beginning, checking for a double imprint or scribal error. No duplication. I resumed, noting carefully the repetitions in saecula saeculorum, non nobis domine, exaltet mens mea, all phrases I had encountered in other texts but here, strung together as if circling something. Then it happened. When I whispered Amen a second time, pure habit, the next line did not proceed. It restarted, word for word, line for line, the same Domine, aperi labia mea, right there at the top. At first, I thought I'd lost my place. I closed my eyes, breathed, found the crease in the scroll, and began again silently now. But each time I reached the final Amen, my eyes would drift back unconsciously, involuntarily to the beginning. I wasn't choosing to reread. I was being drawn. I blinked. The candle beside me was taller. Candle wax does not rise. And yet it stood nearly a finger higher than when I began. I looked away, rubbed my eyes, checked the chamber's air vents. No wind, no mirrors, no tricks of reflection. My tool scalpel, pH blot, magnifier were undisturbed. And yet I felt disturbed. I returned to the scroll. I spoke the first line again, quietly. Domine, aperi labia mea. Something in the air shifted. Not a breeze, not heat, a presence. The silence of the vault pressed in tighter. With each repetition of the scroll, the sense of time unraveled. My watch had stopped. I wound it nothing. The second hand hung motionless at 3:17. I stood. The room tilted not literally, but as if the geometry of the chamber had subtly stretched. The corners seemed farther apart. The distance from scroll to wall lengthened, and the candle, taller still, at least half its original length had returned. Its flame no longer gave heat. That was when I began to hear something else, something low, breathless, a whisper without words, not from the room, from within the scroll itself. I stepped back. My lips moved involuntarily. Domine, aperi labia mea. My voice, and yet not entirely mine. I attempted to leave. My body turned, my hands gripped the edges of the table, but something resisted. A weight, spiritual more than physical. As if stepping away from the scroll required permission I had not earned. The prayer spoke again, not through my lips this time. It filled the chamber with breath, not sound. The candlelight grew denser, not brighter, casting no shadow at all. The flame no longer danced. It stood like a spike of amber. I forced myself to speak in Italian. This is not sanctioned. I revoked the reading under Vatican Rule 12. My voice sounded small, paper thin. Nothing changed. I tried to close the scroll, but my fingers refused to grip the parchment. Not pain resistance, like trying to grasp oil. So I did the unthinkable. I ripped it. A single tear, no longer than a thumb. The scroll bled. Not ink, not blood. Something in between, dark, glinting, and fragrant. The scent reminded me of my first ordination. Incense, old wood, and wine, long turned to vinegar. The scroll trembled, and a sound echoed not through the air, but through my teeth. Like chanting, but reversed. The Latin now flowed backward, phrases unforming themselves. Amen. Exultet. Non nobis. Sensus. Domine. I slammed my hand down on the parchment and shouted, Amen, loud and final. The candle exploded silently. Its wax froze in mid-air, reversed its fall, and fused back into the stem. The flame shrank to a pinprick, then vanished entirely. Darkness fell. I heard one word, just one, from the space where the scroll lay. Iterum. Again. When I came to, I was seated in the pews of the Archivum's chapel, robes damp with wax and sweat. The scroll was gone. In its place on the altar was a sealed folder with red stitching. Inside, a simple note. Scroll 14, B, has been reassigned. Recitation forbidden. Containment ongoing. That was all. No mention of the candle. No disciplinary inquiry. No acknowledgement. Since then, I have found myself waking at 3:17 every morning. I do not set an alarm. I do not want to. There is no scroll in my chamber. No candle. Yet I still hear the syllables forming aperi labia mea. The prayer remains with me, not as words, but as rhythm. A loop without end. A flame that grows when it should die. Some prayers, like certain truths, do not conclude. They return, and they wait to be answered. The hallway outside Chapel VI was measured to be 13 meters long. I know this because Bishop Rinaldi's shadow once stretched well past it. My name is Carlo Fiore. I've served as a Vatican night guard since 2009. You will not find my post on the visitor maps. My duty is rotational, but for the past 7 years, I've been assigned to the lesser-known passages between the Hall of Pontifical Seals and the Cloister of the Scribes. It's the quietest route in the compound. Few know it exists. By night, I walk it hourly, keys clicking in my palm, murmuring the designated Latin phrase at each turn, sine lumine, in ordine, without light, in order. There are exactly 14 such checkpoints between midnight and 4 a.m., each a carved plaque set into the wall, each a place where light should not linger. If my torch casts a beam too long or too dim, protocol says to return to the previous checkpoint and begin again. Light misbehaving is not considered a mechanical issue here. We are instructed not to record what we see unless ordered to. Even among ourselves, we do not share experiences unless they become procedural. That is why I have never reported what I saw on the morning of June 21st, 2022. But I remember the date precisely. It was the feast of St. Aloysius Gonzaga, a quiet day. No public masses, no tourist groups, just clergy and night staff in hushed motion. And Bishop Rinaldi, walking ahead of me down the old limestone corridor at 3:17 in the morning. He shouldn't have been there. Bishops don't walk the inspection routes. That's for guards and archivists. The highest-ranking clergy rarely appear without entourage, and never in silence. But Rinaldi had no assistant with him. No liturgical robes, only the shadow of his zucchetto visible in profile. He didn't speak. I turned the corner from checkpoint 9, and there he was, 40 meters ahead, walking slowly. My boots slowed instinctively. His steps made no sound on the stone, though mine echoed sharply. At first, I thought it was a trick of the corridor or something with the angles. But when I raised my torch, I noticed something I can only describe as a pause in the air. His shadow moved before him. Not in the normal sense. Not just stretched forward like a figure against a light source. It moved before him in the way a memory moves before recognition. Then it split. Still joined at the heels, but fanning outward across the floor like multiple arms reaching, each with a head and shoulders. 5 shadows total, each slightly out of step. I said nothing. I do not know why. My throat tightened and my chest clenched, but my boots held me still. Bishop Rinaldi slowed, not turning, not reacting, and stopped at checkpoint 11. He bowed his head, resting both hands behind his back. The shadows kept moving. They did not mirror him. 2 flickered toward the side wall. 1 curled unnaturally around a corner that did not exist. The 4th moved past him right toward me, fading just before it crossed the light of my torch. And then he walked on. I did not resume my patrol. I stood there for some time, how long I could not say. My wristwatch had frozen, not slowed, frozen. The second hand pointed straight up at 12 and did not twitch until I turned back toward checkpoint 9. When I finally made it to the security office, I found the night schedule adjusted. My partner Claudio, who was scheduled to relieve me at 4 a.m., had been reassigned to the archive basement without notice. That wing had been sealed for restoration for over a year. The logbook on the desk was different. Usually, we record name, time, and prayer phrase. The page I turned to today's had 1 line already filled out in red ink. 3:17 a.m., Bishop Rinaldi, in Ordine. There was no signature. No one uses red ink. I flipped backward to yesterday's page. Every entry was mine, black pen. I turned back to today's and watched as the ink line faded before my eyes, drawn backwards stroke by stroke, as though unwriting itself. By sunrise, it was gone entirely. At 8:45 that morning, an internal memo arrived on my desk, stamped with the copper sigil reserved for confidential clerical notices. Bishop Corrado Rinaldi reassigned to special post. Effective immediately. No follow-up required. There was no destination listed. 2 nights later, I returned to checkpoint 11 alone. I told myself it was duty, that I wanted to ensure the corridor behaved properly, that all checkpoints responded to torchlight as they should. But I think I went to see if the shadow remained. I arrived at precisely 3:15 a.m. and waited. The corridor was cold, still. Then, just as the clock on my comm device struck 3:17, the overhead light flickered. I did not hear footsteps. I did not hear prayer. But I saw the shadow. It was not cast on the floor, but rising slowly up the right-hand wall, elongated against the relief carvings of saints and martyrs. The shadow had no clear source. No figure walked nearby. It emerged like breath on glass, soft, elongated, almost graceful. 5 silhouettes again, each distorting differently. This time I recognized something deeply wrong. One of the shadows had no head. Another bent backward, limbs arched in reverse like a marionette held wrong. They moved with intention, like they were rehearsing a process. Not toward me, not away, just pacing, practicing. I stepped back, and the corridor brightened sharply, but not from my torch. A gold light issued from the opposite end of the hallway, almost like sunlight through stained glass, but warmer, more visceral. Then I heard a voice, not in my ears but inside my chest. A voice I knew. Rinaldi. He was praying, but not words from any liturgy I've known. His voice repeated a phrase I cannot translate, and yet I understood it to mean, "It is still measuring me." I turned and ran. I did not follow protocol. I skipped 5 checkpoints, broke pace, and exited through an unauthorized stairwell. When I checked the schedule that morning, my name had been removed for the following week, a silent, unrequested leave. No one answered when I inquired. I have not seen Bishop Rinaldi since that week. His name has not appeared in liturgical records, nor has it passed the lips of any Monsignor or Cardinal in conversation. But once, 3 months later, during the early hours of a maintenance drill, I passed checkpoint 11 again. The torchlight flickered, and the line of saints along the wall cast no shadows except one. A single shadow lingered briefly, arms behind its back, head bowed. It was his posture. I would recognize it anywhere. I whispered the phrase, "Sine lumine," in Ordin, and continued walking. That corridor remains on the patrol map, but none of the newer guards ever asked to walk it. Some instinct seems to warn them. A week ago, a copper-sealed memo arrived on my desk. It was blank. No date, no name, just the copper sigil, and one faint watermark, like a rubbed fingerprint across old vellum. When I held it to the light, the shape it revealed was unmistakable. A bishop's hat, with 5 shadows beneath. There is a rule in the 5th Archive. No one listens at the door of Vault C unless summoned. The air it exhales is colder than the stone that surrounds it, and colder still is the voice you might hear beneath it. My name is Sofia Belandi. I have served as a Vatican archivist since the autumn of 2011. My assignment is the 5th Archivia, rarely spoken of wing, beneath the older archives, below the level accessible by card or code. It lies 5 stories beneath the ground and is only reachable by a copper-keyed lift watched over by the Swiss Guard. I was one of 3 authorized keepers. We rotated the night watch, not out of necessity, but out of tradition. There is nothing in the 5th Archive that should need Gardingenly containment. Most of what I handled was classified under irreconcilable ritual relics scrolls that cannot be deciphered, music that repeats outside of meter, and devotional objects too sacred to destroy but too strange to display. There are drawers labeled in Latin, Hebrew, and script I do not recognize. And at the end of the deepest hall is the door to Vault C. It is stainless steel, circular like the old submarine doors, bolted tight into concrete that is darker than the rest. There is no keyhole, there is no label, Just a recessed copper panel that reads Cave Intra Murum. Beware within the wall. The protocol is simple. We do not touch the door. We do not document it. We do not speak of it aloud. I first noticed it during a routine inventory inspection in early spring. The floor stones nearest to Vault C were beaded with condensation, though no water lines ran through that section of the archive. It felt colder there, not from lack of heat, but as if the air itself had been exhaled from some deep lung. I had passed the door 100 times before without incident. But that night, something made me pause. I remember the silence how utterly complete it was. My ears strained for the hum of the vault lights, the dull groan of aging pipes, but there was nothing. Then I heard it, the faintest sound, like breathing. I stepped closer. The air smelled metallic, like damp stone and candle wax left too long extinguished. I lowered my ear to the door, not touching, not disobeying, just listening. What I heard should have been impossible. Chanting, faint, far below, echoing up, not through ducts or wires, but through the very core of the stone. Male voices, ancient in tone, not Gregorian, not quite human in cadence, and the melodiet was backwards. I straightened quickly, heartbeat hammering in my neck. For the rest of the night, I stayed near the central desk. The next night, I returned for a double shift. I told myself I needed to re-inventory a damaged scroll container, but in truth, I could not stop thinking about the door. I brought a candle with me instead of the overhead light. Sometimes we did that for restoration reading, when electric bulbs might damage ink. But the candle behaved strangely near the vault. The flame pulled toward the door, as if drawn to something behind it. I moved it back still, it leaned forward. It wasn't air current, there was no draft. It was as if the candle was bowing. I knelt beside it, letting the silence settle. And then again I heard it. This time the chant was slower, deeper. The words were in Latin, but the grammar was wrong. Reversed, maybe, or mirrored. Still, something about it stirred memory. One phrase echoed clearly. Domine, non, sum, dignus. Lord, I am not worthy. But the voice made it sound like a plea. I tried to step back, but the soles of my shoes felt stuck to the floor. Not physically, psychologically. As if every part of me was meant to stay and listen. I tore myself away, nearly dropping the candle. The flame went out the moment I crossed the corner of the corridor. I did not relight it. When I returned to the upper levels, a sealed folder had been left on my desk. Red stamp. No return code. It simply read, Inventory Note. Room C. Do not request second confirmation. Destroy after reading. Inside was a single line. It breathes when it listens. Do not let it finish the chant. I burned the note in the wax basin near the reliquary desk, as instructed. I did not sleep that night. On the night of March 26th, I was awakened at 3:17 a.m. My bedside Vatican communicator had not rung. No message, no code. I simply awoke, fully alert, as if summoned. I dressed in my archivist uniform and descended without checking the guard station. The copper lift opened for me. No one stood inside. I passed through the fifth archive in silence, my candle in hand. The walls did not echo my steps. Even my breath felt muffled. When I reached Vault C, the door was different. It was still sealed, yes, but the copper warning panel had demetas if tarnished from within. The metal surface bore marks, not scratches, but indentations, symmetrical and rhythmic, as if something had been pressing outward from the other side. The breathing had changed too. No longer subtle. It was a slow inhale, a long pause, and a wheezing, mournful exhale. With each breath, a cold fog pulsed out from the seams around the vault, settling on the floor like mist in a crypt. I lowered myself again to listen. The chant was loud this time. It echoed deep, like from the inside of a well carved into the core of the earth. Dozens of voices, maybe more, each in perfect harmony, except for one voice that sang just slightly behind the others. A half beat off, always trying to catch up. And then I recognized something. The off-rhythm voice, it was mine. I don't mean it sounded like might was me. The tone, the pitch, the slight wavering on long vowels I tried to control during prayer. It was my voice, singing alongside them, one line behind. I stumbled backward. My candle flared in response, as if reacting to my fear. I turned to leave, but the hall behind me had changed. Where there should have been archival shelves and benches, there was only stone, smooth, seamless, like a wall that had never been cut. I heard the chanting rise. It was reaching some kind of refrain, and my voice, my own voice, began the line I knew would come next. Domine, non sum dignus. I pressed my hands to my ears. The chant echoed in my skull. I fell to my knees. The vault door pulsed once in Haley and the lights of the archive dimmed. Then silence, deafening. The hall returned, just like that. The shelves were back, the mist was gone, the vault door was cold again, and the flame of my candle had gone perfectly still. I stood. My knees shook, but I walked slowly, without looking back toward the lift. When I reached the surface, the copper key had already been removed from my satchel. I never received another night shift assignment again. The fifth archive still exists, though I have not been below the second sublevel in over a year. I now oversee minor artifact transfers for the Basilica's public collection. No one has mentioned Vault C again. Benedictine Father Corsi passed me once in the North Corridor last month. He nodded politely, but as he passed, I heard him mutter, "It always sings, just before the wall breathes." He never broke stride. I sleep with a candle beside my bed now. If it ever leans toward the wall, I will leave Rome and never return. But sometimes, in the last moments before sleep, I hear it faintly, a single voice, out of rhythm, and it is always mine. The ink was 400 years old, yet it bled into my gloves like it had been written that morning. My name is Enzo Parisi. I restore manuscripts too fragile or too sacred to be left in ordinary hands. My workshop is beneath the Clementine Library, 3 vaults down, past the coded gate that requires both thumbprint and psalm. I've worked for the Vatican Apostolic Archive for nearly 17 years, and I have learned that ink, like faith, is delicately revived with reverence, never forced. Each week, I am assigned a folio or volume from the vaults, worm-eaten psalters, fire-kissed missals, or vellum sheets that once sat on prelates' private altars. I clean the pages with sable brushes, rebind spines using linen threads soaked in beeswax, and stabilize ink that flakes with the breath. Every project begins and ends the same way. I recite the Restorer's Prayer before touching a text, and I log my notes by hand into the black ledger, dated and sealed with the archivist's mark. There are rules in our field rules older than the buildings themselves. No artificial light on unblessed parchment. Never restore a text that has not first been approved by the Office of Containment. And most importantly, if the ink runs when touched, report it immediately and stop all work. Until this year, I had never needed that last rule. The Psalter came in a red-threaded wrap, labeled simply Codex P47, Psalmi Penitentialis, with a date noted as circa 1587. No commentary, no seal. It had not passed through containment, something I did not realize until too late. The pages were thick with soot along the edges, as though it had once survived a fire. When I opened it, the parchment sighed an odd word, I know, but accurate. There was a breath to the book, as though each page turned released something warmer than dust and older than words. It was handwritten in Latin, beautifully so, but the ink was strange. It shimmered faintly in low light, like dampness clinging to a stone wall. I tapped a fine brush across the edge of one initial letter and found it wet, not sticky, not smeared. Wet, as though the quill had just left it. I rechecked the date, 1587. Assuming condensation or contamination, I tested a corner with blotting parchment. The paper darkened fresh ink. Still, it was late, and I had already catalogued 2 other volumes that day. I marked the book as pending verification, rewrapped it, and stored it in the cool drawer marked R5, pending. The next morning, the wrap was gone. The book lay open on the work table to Psalm 51. Miserere mei, Deus. Have mercy on me, O God. I did not remember unwrapping it. I live alone and have no assistant. The drawer requires 2 keys, both on my person. Worse, the ink looked different. The psalm was the same David's lament after his sin, but the right margin now had what looked like a faint smudge of script. I bent closer. It was a new line, smaller and neater than the others. Quid queris? It said. What do you seek? It hadn't been there before. I blinked hard. I ran my finger lightly along the margin. Ink bled again, this time in a faint oval shape as though a fingerprint had risen from beneath. My fingerprint, but I hadn't touched that page. I followed protocol. I marked the manuscript as inconclusive origin, flagged it for review, and placed it in the lead-lined vault reserved for anomalous texts. I recited the Restorer's Prayer aloud, sealed the door, and went home. That night, I dreamt of parchment that pulsed like flesh. I returned the next day to find the Psalter not in the vault, but once again on my desk. This time, open to Psalm 130. De profundis clamavi ad te, Domine. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. And there, beneath the final line, was a new sentence. Stop turning these pages. On the 3rd night, I broke the rule. I should have gone to the Office of Containment. I should have called Father Bellucci, who oversees dangerous texts. Instead, I turned the page. Psalm 131, then 132, more lines. Handwritten editions began to appear, not in Latin, but in Italian. My phrasing, my syntax, my handwriting. They curled at the bottom margins like secrets scribbled in confession. This is not how I wanted to know. It writes while I sleep. The ink knows where I will stop. On Psalm 135, the text ended mid-verse. The ink had not yet dried. It glistened as I watched. Then, slowly, beneath my breath, I began to speak the lines aloud, not by choice, not in prayer, but as though something moved through me. I heard myself reading the verse in cadence, the words rolling out faster than my comprehension. And then I heard the second voice. It came from behind me, soft, hoarse, and perfectly in time with mine. A second mouth, speaking the same words, syllable for syllable. I turned. No one. Yet the air was damp, not cold wet, as if a mouth had spoken near my ear. I closed the book. I locked it in the lead-lined case. I sealed it with a wax sigil I had never used before, etched with the shape of a closed eye. The manual never explains that seal. It simply lists the symbol beside the words, for texts that look back. The next morning, my fingertips were stained. A deep brown black. Not ink, blood. There were lines written across my own palms, faint but visible, in a cursive I did not know. I dared not read them. The Psalter has since vanished. No record of Codex P47 exists in the archive ledger now, not even in the backup folios. My written notes are intact, but where I reference the Psalter, there is only a blank space, clean and white, the ink scrubbed as if it had never been laid down. Father Bellucci asked me yesterday if I had time to assist on a binding task for a manuscript marked in red thread. I declined. I sleep rarely now. When I do, I dream of ink floating on water, letters forming and unforming like breath fogging on glass. And sometimes, if I wake at 3:17, I find the tips of my fingers damp, and my lips already murmuring a verse I don't remember learning. This morning, I found a slip of paper tucked under my door, unmarked, no signature. It read only, "You turned too far." I burned it. But the words reappeared in the margin of a book I wasn't reading. There are psalms that do not end, and ink that writes itself while you sleep. I will not turn another page. We are never to look through the keyholes in the old wing, not even to confirm a locked door. That instruction is not for security. It is for mercy. My name is Vincenzo Lupo. I've served in the Pontifical Guard for 18 years, assigned mostly to perimeter duty, processions, and archival wing monitoring. The public imagines glamour, crimson capes, Swiss halberds, St. Peter's Square at dawn. In truth, most of our duties are silent, shadowed, and constrained by rules that extend beyond the laws of men. In 2024, I was rotated into Internal Wing D for night shifts, not the famed Apostolic Library, where unauthorized access is not merely discouraged, but theologically forbidden. Most of these doors are not on any modern map. Room numbers are painted in old Roman forms, some fading into the stone as though absorbed by time itself. There is one door with no number, just a deep, mahogany arch with 3 brass locks and a carved archangel above, eyes sanded smooth. We call it the Bishop's Door. A logbook is kept at the post 10 meters away. Guards are required to note any sound, scent, or atmospheric shift, even if it seems subjective. I had seen logs written in trembling hands that described the odor of chrism without source, or chanting with no direction. I had always assumed embellishment. Not anymore. I began my new post on a cold Monday in November. The previous guard, Mauro, I believe avoided my eyes as he handed over the keys and clipboard. "Do not stand too close," he said. 3 paces minimum. That's not superstition, that's protocol. Then he walked off before I could respond. The first few nights passed without incident. I would pace the corridor, note the hour every half hour, and observe the required silent minute at 3:17 a.m. per instruction. That time is marked in bold in the handbook. It is when we are to stop, breathe, and listen, not for intruders, but for alignment. If the corridor breathes, it reads, "Record it, but do not react." On the 5th night, I arrived to find the Bishop's Door unusually cold. Not just cool to the touch, it radiated a chill I felt before my fingers brushed the handle. I logged the temperature difference. A few hours later, at the 3:17 mark, I swore I heard something behind it. Not movement, but a shift, as if many bodies had collectively inhaled. I kept my distance. I recited the standard psalm for night duty, "Si ambulem in medio umbrae mortis," but the end caught in my throat. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt attentive. Night 7 is when the corridor's behavior changed. The candles we use, real flame in the internal wing to avoid electronic interference with relics, began to drip upward, just one at first, as if gravity had briefly reversed and returned before I looked again. I checked the air vents. There were none. That same night, I found the logbook's last entry, written in a different hand, more angular, unfamiliar. It read only, "Miters do not cast shadows." I asked command if someone else had signed in. They confirmed I was alone that shift. Mauro had left the assignment entirely. I reread the line 3 times before closing the book. The next evening, the brass of the Bishop's Door locks was warm, though the rest of the door remained cold, almost like the warmth of breath through metal. I remembered Mauro's warning, 3 paces. Then, at precisely 4:04 a.m., I heard what sounded like wooden weight, shifting like robes brushing against pews from behind the door. But I didn't. The mistake came on the 9th night. I had dropped my pen. It rolled forward across the marked safe line and settled just beside the Bishop's Door. I debated leaving it, but the action felt cowardly, petty even. I was trained to maintain order. My boots crossed the line. No voice called out. No wind rose. But I swear, even before I reached down, I felt something change behind the door. A pressure. Then, foolishly, instinctively, I looked. The brass keyhole was ornamental, not used to unlock anything, but it was hollow, and I was only human. I leaned in. For the length of one breath, I saw them. Rows upon rows of bishops stood within a chamber I could not account for, spatially too large for the floor plan. Each wore pristine vestments, white and gold. Their mitres gleamed faintly, catching some unseen light. But their faces, I couldn't see their faces. They were turned away, every single one, all facing a central altar made of black stone, unmarked, except for a shallow depression at its center. The air shimmered above it. Not one of them moved. Not one blinked. Then, and this I cannot explain, one mitre turned. Not the head beneath it, the mitre itself, as if it swiveled independently toward me, acknowledging the keyhole's gaze. The others remained perfectly still. I jerked back so hard I scraped my temple on the lock plate. There was no sound from behind the door, but the corridor was now thick with incense. No censer had burned that night. I recorded everything, every detail. Then I crossed out the report with a single red line, the code for internal review only. I was reassigned 2 days later to outdoor perimeter duty. No explanation, no formal disciplinary note, just a plain envelope with a copper key inside a different post. I didn't protest. Mauro sent me a message that same week. No greeting, just a single line. It always notices the first one who looks. I do not dream of what I saw. I do not speak of it. But sometimes during morning mass, when the bishops enter for procession, I catch myself staring too long at the back of their mitres, watching, waiting. None of them have ever turned, but in the silence between bells, I imagine the faintest pressure, like a gaze pressed against a keyhole from the other side. We still guard the bishop's door, but now it has a new rule posted. Not engraved. Painted in red. Do not approach during Vespers. No reason given, just the hour. And the unspoken understanding that some doors inside this city are not meant to keep us out. They are meant to keep something in. There is a protocol in the secret archive. Red-ribboned parchments are never to be unsealed without a written summons from the College of Custodians, and never after midnight prayers. My name is Beatrice Romano. I serve as an archivist beneath the Apostolic Palace, 2 levels below the oldest chapel, where the stone walls breathe dust and incense and time itself forgets to move. The hours are long, but we speak of them as sacred vigil. Each archivist is entrusted with one wing of the Vatican Secreta, and mine is called the Scala Vetera, the stair of the old things. It smells of oak, glue, beeswax, and something sour beneath it all, like forgotten fruit. Our tasks are slow and exact. Catalog, brush, transcribe, restore. We wear gloves. We speak little. The lamps are wick-fed. The clocks are wound by hand. For certain cabinets, we recite the Latin catalog number before opening them aloud, as if announcing ourselves to whatever sleeps inside. There are sealed compartments, drawers that only open when 2 keys are turned at once, one by me and one by a custodian. But on this particular evening, I had been given permission to begin sorting unlisted materials recovered from the suppressed section of Index Tria, transferred discreetly from Room D. It was the Feast of St. Jerome. My shift began at 8 in the evening and would end at 3:30 in the morning. At precisely 11:45, I reached for a parchment tied with red ribbon. It was heavier than it should have been, thick with iron gall ink, no doubt, and bore the unmistakable scent of old myrrh. But what caught my attention first was the ribbon, not the usual crimson silk used for restricted documents, but a kind of fibrous red twine, dry as brittle grass. It was not listed in the box's manifest. I double-checked. No entry, no shelf number, no cross-reference. The parchment was sealed, yes, but not waxed. It bore no sigil. My hands hesitated long enough for the flame of my lamp to flicker toward the parchment, as if stirred by breath. I looked around. No one. The hallway was dark, silent, as it always is when the other archivists are in prayer. I admit now that I broke protocol. I untied the ribbon. It did not fall away. It unwound itself slowly, deliberately, fiber twisting and snapping until it came loose on its own. I remember feeling cold, not in my body, but in my name, as if something ancient had taken an interest in who I was. When I opened the parchment, the ink appeared faint, almost invisible, but the page was dense with markings, not handwriting, not script, impressions. Like something had written itself, then been erased and pressed over again, a palimpsest without origin. But there, in the lower margin, a name had begun surfacing. Mine, Beatrice Romano. Beneath it, in a hand not yet fully formed, a date. It read 31st October, 2025. I had to read it twice. It was not today's date. It was not tomorrow's. It had not yet come. I set the parchment down and reached for the light, adjusting the lamp to read more clearly. The parchment's edge had begun curling toward me. I turned to check the hallway again. That was when I saw it. The shadows were incorrect. The iron gate at the corridor's end had thrown 3 shadows instead of one fanning slightly outward, like fingers reaching from the same wrist. They twitched. I closed the parchment and placed it back in its box. But the red ribbon had vanished. I should have reported it immediately. There is a procedure. I did not follow it. Instead, I remained at my station, working in silence for another hour, pretending to catalog volumes that I no longer saw. But my eyes kept returning to the closed lid of the box, to the absence of the red ribbon. At 1:43, the flame of my lamp grew tall and steady, without flicker, as if enclosed in glass though there was no cover. The air felt dense. Sound seemed muffled. My heartbeat, though steady, began to feel like a bell being rung from the inside. I found myself whispering the letters of my name. Not from fear. From compulsion. B-E-A. I stopped. My lips had not moved. The voice, faint and dry, had spoken them for me. A mirrored echo, syllables drawn just after mine, half a breath behind. I stood and backed away from the desk. The parchment box was open again. I had not touched it. This time, the parchment bore a new line beneath my name. It read, "You have seen it now." No ink, just darkened parchment, as if the message had always been there, waiting for exposure. My gloves trembled. I reached for the nearest copper key, the one we keep beside the bell, in case of sacred irregularities, and made for the elevator. It did not arrive. The indicator lights were off. From the stairwell came the faintest sound, not footsteps, not breathing, something softer. The sound of turning pages. I descended the staircase, not in bravery, in inevitability. Each floor I passed was darker than the last, until only the flame of my lamp lit the way. At the bottom, I found the sub-archive chamber known as the Ordo Nona, used primarily for indexing predictions, revelations, and visions deemed neither fully heretical nor fully divine. The door was open. Inside, the long table bore a single candle unlit. The others had been taken. But spread across the length of the table, pinned at each corner, was the parchment I had unsealed. It had grown. What was once a sheet no larger than a legal folio now stretched nearly the length of the table, its edges frayed, darkened, curling like old skin. And written upon it thousands of names, each one followed by a date. Some dates bore the past, many from centuries ago. Some bore the present month. Others bore years yet to come. One name had been circled twice. Beatrice Romano, 31st October, 2025. But it was no longer alone. Just beneath it, a new entry had surfaced, a name I did not know, but which chilled me more than my own. Silvano Greco, 31st October, 2025. Father Silvano was another archivist. He worked 2 wings over in the exorcism index. I had not spoken to him in weeks, yet here he was, marked beside me. Same date, same inkless press. I stumbled back. The flame of my lamp surged 3 times and died. In that utter dark, I heard them voices, reciting names, whispering dates, not chanting, not rhythmic, but deliberate, as if confirming attendance. The parchment moved. It curled toward me again, edge lifting from the table, like a hand reaching without joints. And though I could not see it, I felt it begin to rewrite. The air shifted. The candle on the table ignited without spark. Its flame burned downward, into the wax, without smoke. I awoke seated in the upper chapel, 1 floor above the archive. My gloves were missing. My key was back on its chain. The copper was warm. I had no recollection of climbing the stairs. The bell had not rung. Father Silvano never returned. His name was struck from the rota. No announcement was made. When I asked the custodian about him, he only said, "He has fulfilled his appointment." I have since sealed the box again, with a ribbon of black twine. I placed it behind a false panel in cabinet 9V. I told no one, not even in confession. Tomorrow is October 31st. The ink on the parchment was never ink at all. I believe it writes in ash. And I believe it knows who will read it before they ever do.